when I hear someone's story like yours owning that level of empire, not only a highly sophisticated operation, but it takes a tremendous amount of capital.
You can talk about scaling business, but in order to scale, you have to understand the business model.
There's a perceived glamour with owning food franchise. And what's obvious in this conversation is like your deep technical knowledge. All right, imagine getting to learn from someone who's owned 27 Taco Bells and 33 KFC franchises and just built an epic franchise empire. Well, you're in for a treat on this one. Peter has one of the most epic backgrounds and portfolio of franchises that he ran and operated for over 20 years. His Taco Bell stores alone did nearly $30 million a year in sales. So we talked in this episode all about how to profitably operate franchise businesses and really what the red flags are that you need to look out for as a buyer of a franchise, along with what you need to do in order to run them successfully and profitably and create a great culture. So he currently owns and operates a Sunbelt business brokerage franchise specializing in helping business owners sell their businesses for the most amount of money possible. So with that said, sit back, relax, and enjoy the episode. Welcome to the Franchise Empire Show. They say Rome wasn't built in a day, and building your empire doesn't happen overnight. My name is Tarek Johnson, and owning franchises is what helped me go from employee to employer and start building my empire for my family. So this podcast is for you, the empire builders. For those of you who want to build something that stands the test of time. This is for those of you who are crazy enough to believe that you can make the dream in your head come to life. This podcast is all about bringing you real people who are building real empires so you can get inside their mind and heart and get proven strategies and actionable insights that will catapult you to build, grow, and scale your empire. Yeah, Peter. So thanks for coming on. So I saw an interview that you did with someone else. I forget what the name of their channel was, but I just so happened to stumble across it. And you were talking about just your experience having been a franchisee and a business broker. And as I started to watch, I'm like, man, this guy knows his stuff. This is awesome. So we want to have you on. And then Josh reached out to you. So thanks for being here.
Hey, no problem. I'm glad to be here. Hopefully I can help somebody.
Yes, I'm sure you can. So you've owned and operated over 27 Taco Bells, right? And you were
Correct.
a multi-brand franchisee with KFC too. Is that correct? With over 33 stores? That's
Yes. So we had 5 KFC Taco Bells. We had 9 KFC A&Ws. And we had 11 KFC Long John Silvers. And then I had a hybrid. It was a barbecue concept out of Tulsa called Rib Crib. Fabulous concept. Great food. I had a combo unit, a KFC Rib Crib unit in Marshfield, Missouri. That was kind of a unique property. So I've kind of learned over the years, a little about all different types of food brands. Some are good and some are
Yeah,
challenging.
that's so crazy. So how, like, someone watching may go, that is just incredible. I mean, I think when I hear a story like yours owning that level of empire, right? That many locations. That's not only a highly sophisticated operation, but it takes a tremendous amount of capital. How did you get your start? Like where did it all start?
Well, I when I came out of college, I went to work for Pepsi, and back then Pepsi was PepsiCo, so it was Pepsi, Taco Bell, Pizza Hut, KFC, Frito Lay. Well, I was an on-premise territory manager, so I called on restaurants and schools, entertainment channel, and Taco Bell was one of my accounts. And so through servicing them and finding ways that no one else serviced them, I got an opportunity to interview for a job with Taco Bell, developing out of premise, out of four walls strategy for sales revenue generation. Back in the 90s, John Martin, the CEO of Taco Bell, his initiative was increasing points of access for Taco Bell by taking the restaurant outside of the four walls. So I initiated a program for school lunch, special events, and on-site catering. That gave me the opportunity to become an operator. I became what's called a market manager for Taco Bell, which I had 25 stores. I ended up with 38 stores before I left. But I was promoted to a franchise business manager, which is liaison between the franchise or and the franchisee. Well, there was a minority package. I had moved to St. Louis for that job. There was a minority package. I'm half Hispanic, and I was approved to the employee ownership program. And I partnered with a couple of NFL guys, and we bought a 12 store package. And then we bought a 17 store package and ran that probably for about 9 years. And then we bought the
Wow. And were
KFC
those, when you
package.
say you bought a package, were those new, that was the rights for new locations or existing locations that you acquired?
Yes, Taco Bell corporate at that time was going through a refranchising mode, and therefore they were packages of former corporate restaurants.
Interesting, interesting. So what was that due diligence like? Like going through, and at this point you had probably known that business model inside and out with how you started out working with them in the corporate sense and essentially coaching franchisees in that role. So like what did that due diligence look like acquiring those businesses, and what were the things that you were looking for um to decide on valuation, price, red flags, etc.
Well, we did obviously when you're buying a package that big, there's usually a M&A group involved that puts the package together for you to review. So all the documents and the relative financial information for properties and profitability, employees, that's all come from the M&A side, the person who's packaging the deal. So the due diligence is just kind of rifling through the financials, matching them up, make sure that they fit industry standards, that there's not any big red flags there um, that are driving sales, like overabundance, contribution to marketing, above and beyond normal scope to drive sales, things of that nature, inventory balances, thing. Assets, the primary when you're buying a restaurant, the primary focus should be on the assets because most restaurants are asset purchases. So you want to identify the deferred depreciation so you can get your fair market value of the assets calibrated such that you're not overpaying for assets that don't have useful life. And that's the critical thing because the big what other than occupancy costs when you're running a portfolio of restaurants, your biggest one of your biggest other than contributors that can affect is your occupancy cost. Um, that's the main driver of profitability is maintaining your occupancy costs. And that's really what in due diligence you're looking for what your occupancy costs primarily on your fixed assets because you want to see how you can leverage your return on assets. I mean, how can you raise the profitability on the existing asset base? Does it give you the ability to do that? So in other words, are you physically capable of driving throughput to drive revenue? And that's basically the business model for QSR in one word
Through
is throughput. It's all about how many transactions you can drive per hour. And that's a function of people assets and equipment setup, line procedures, the setup of your operations getting ready to deliver high volumes.
Yeah, what's interesting to me is that, I think having talked to hundreds of franchise buyers or prospective buyers, and just the questions I've got having the YouTube channel over the years, it's like I think there's a perceived glamour with owning, a QSR, a food franchise, and some of these big names. But, what's obvious in this conversation is like your deep technical knowledge, right? Like someone needs to operate these things and know how to run them, and I think sometimes people forget about that. But what advice would you give for someone that may want to own a QSR, and for those listening, QSR is quick service restaurant, right? So your average fast food joint or Starbucks or smoothie shop or anything like that. Like what would be your advice for someone? Because I mean, like that didn't seem to be your intention starting out. Like you started working at Taco Bell, rose up the ranks, and then obviously worked hard, developed a name for yourself, and had an opportunity.
Well, I think the main thing is that you have to have the passion for the business. The restaurant business is a unique business. Unique people get in the restaurant business. So the first thing is you have to have a passion. You have to see the sustainability of the concept, right? So as we're talking about new concepts like crumbles and others that come on the front, the market opportunity that lies within it. If you don't really have passion for the business, it's hard to get by the ups and downs. Um, the other critical component is the culture that you bring to the play. And what I mean by this is if you're running a portfolio of restaurants, the difference between great, good, and bad is usually driven, all things being considered, restaurant location, facility type, everything else. It's the culture of the restaurant, the culture that the leader of that restaurant drives in that facility. As an owner, we all understand that we cannot be at all places at all times. However, we can be there in spirit. And that spirit shines through the operation 24/7 if you drive it that way. And so the cultural aspect is one, part of the environment, two, part of the leadership, and part of the charter you make within the team on how you work together.
My intention with this podcast is to help you build your empire. If you've gotten a single piece of value, one of the best ways you can help me and the podcast is to simply press the like button on YouTube. Lastly, share this podcast. Share it with someone who you know who is an empire builder. Imagine the impact you can have by helping them learn something that can build their business and empire. People will associate the value they got from this information from you, the person that shared it with them, all because you shared it with them. I appreciate you and your support. Let's get back to the episode.
Right? It's a process that starts with the leader, that embodies the culture, that drives it down to the team level, that creates a flow of empowerment that's based on customer satisfaction.
Mm. And so how did you what were some of the tactical things that you did or the day-to-day things to, impact culture? And especially as you get to the point now where you're overseeing 27 locations, and so I would presume you'd have store managers and area managers. And so how did you do that from your perspective? And then how did you train those managers at their level to do that as well?
Well, it all starts with getting rid of all of the small complications that ruin things. And maybe I didn't articulate that very good. Eliminating all of the problems, right? So, for example, inventory. So let's say you're running an operation. You can't run out of meat if you're Taco Bell, right? So you have to have systems and processes to make sure you don't do that. Well, one of the things, reducing complexity inside the operation for the manager allows them time to work with their people. I'll give you a perfect tactical example. In the back of the house, what we did, we arranged all of the back of the houses by building style the same. We had build to levels put on the shelves. So if you were a new manager and I was teaching you, you're a shift manager or an assistant manager, I'm teaching you how to do an order. I've simplified the process because tactically I've labeled that shelf and it says cups, bill to 3 cases. There's one case, what do? You order two. So by reducing the complexity of things that create frustration, that creates an environment, a hostile environment, is what your goal is. Reduce the touch points that create stress and tension, and then you can focus on having the good time.
It seems like such an obvious thing to do, but having owned and operated a few QSR franchises, yeah, that was something that would be a pain in the butt, because then someone puts something away in an area that it's not, people don't see it easily, or it's behind something else, and then all of a sudden, you run out at a time where you didn't have the front of the house stocked up, so now you're dealing with a customer, and in the middle of that transaction, you're having to run to the back. Now the customer's frustrated, and it seems like such a simple thing, but that's when people start to get frustrated and annoyed with each other. And yeah, I would imagine at 27 locations or so, unless you want to kind of be operating a circus, like those are the little things that have to be dialed down.
That's correct. And again, the frustration levels
Mm.
ruin culture. Other critical thing, Tariq, is when you orientate a new employee, you have to make sure you bring that person in. You introduce them to everybody. You show them the whole restaurant. You tell him, that person, what they're going to do that day and who are their support people. How many times have you walked into a QSR restaurant, stood at the front counter, and the poor person behind the register didn't know how to key in your order? It was their first day. The manager's overrun, comes over, yells at the person, and then at the end of the shift, the guy thinks that the employee thinks, "Hey, what kind of jungle am I living in? Right? I don't need this stress. I got enough stress at home." The value of onboarding and bringing them in to the culture, and again, critical critical statement: culture, culture, culture. It's all about the culture that you have in the restaurant that drive customer metrics. If they're happy and smiling, you're a happy customer because you know things are going right. If you walk in and that registered person's got a smirk on their face, or they're not smiling, immediately your impact is, okay, what am I going to expect today?
Mm. Now, one of the things that, at least, that I pay attention to, and for people that want to, it's interesting that you said, hey, if you want to be in the food business, like you need to be, passionate about it. And I find that most of the time people just, want to own a big name just because it's a big name and they think it makes a lot of money. But what people don't often know is that food businesses have, tend to have lower profit margins. So can you speak on that from your experience? Like what were the type of margins, as a percentage, that you guys were looking for in your restaurants, and like how did you what were the things you were doing to manage profitability or move the needle?
Well, when you run a portfolio of restaurants, it typically breaks down. You can have 33% are winners, 33% are the average, and 33% are going to be challenging. So the winners make up for the challenging. You usually end up somewhere in the. So you'll have stores. A lot of it, Tariq, is depending upon occupancy cost. And I
And when you say occupancy costs, can you just, for the purpose of people listening, what do you mean by that?
Your rent structure and what it costs you to be there, primarily rent structure. The biggest absorption of cash flow is your rent structure. It's the biggest liability that any business owner has if you're leasing, right? Because if your lease is $40,000 a year and you've got a 5-year lease, that's a $200,000 liability, right? So typically speaking, what what mostly fails concepts is too much rent per square foot. If you're doing, when you look at your investments for a restaurant, it is critical to see what your return on investment is per square foot. I don't care if you're in the best spot. If it's $25 a square foot plus cam, you're looking at 29. You still have to cover that, whether it's you're closed because of snow, Whether the city comes up and puts up barriers in front of your restaurants because they're doing road construction, that is the number that you can't run away. It's the only thing that you cannot pay that will close you down. You can push off your food vendors. Basically, labor, paying people, and paying your rent are the two things that you cannot avoid. So you have to make sure those are in line. Now, especially if you're going into a new concept, I see this all the time. I have people coming to me that have bought into new concepts and they've paid a good sum of money for the franchise fee and the build out, but then the franchisor doesn't provide them the coaching to get the right lease component, the right occupancy cost. Some I've seen some at $17 a square foot, and they're doing $300,000 in sales. I mean, it just doesn't work. So be very, very cautious about your occupancy cost. Should not be more than 12%. Your goal would be between 8 and 10. So if your revenue numbers are not showing occupancy costs less than 12%, I would say that's a huge red flag.
Mm, it's interesting, and it's something that I see. So we have this system called the zero to profitable franchise system, and one of the things that's very unique about what we do is that we keep working with franchise buyers. So someone uses our system and they can use it to find and buy their own thing, or like our franchise brokerage team can help them, but they get to stay in our program in these group coaching calls that we do, and we'll provide our knowledge base because we have some coaches on our team that operate franchises or multi-unit franchise owners, and so we'll walk them through the LOI and negotiating that stuff, because what I experienced as a franchisee was the same thing that you were just saying, which was a lack of coaching, kind of a general like, here's what you want to look for. And then, you got the commercial broker, but the commercial broker, you're just one of many, and they don't care if you pay an extra dollar or $2 a square foot, or if you get an extra $2 to $5 a square foot in TI. It really doesn't make a huge difference for them in the way that they're compensated. They just want to get the deal done and move on to the next person. What I learned was that, man, an extra $3 a square foot on my 1,200 square foot location, that's an extra 5 grand back in my pocket. That's an important difference for me, as the owner and operator. So, I think it's interesting that, that you say that. And so you see that often with new buyers.
I do. We get a lot of, unfortunately, as the business advisor brokerage firm that we are, not everybody comes to us at the right time. I've had franchisees come to me when basically there's nothing left to sell. The problem you get into is if you buy a new franchise and things are going south, talk to somebody right away. Because once it gets too far down the road, then you're looking at a complete asset sale or a cash sale. The banks, or you're going to finance the whole thing yourself. Now, when you're looking for a franchise, I would say that my recommendation is look at what the brand requirements are as far as the site location. Now, a lot of them will give you 100 feet off a primary road, 1,500 square feet. But think about the long term perspective, right? How many guys opened up Jimmy John's and Subway stores and didn't think about having a drive through? Now they're stuck mid center. That's why subways are closing down. Really bad site selection. They're back off street in shopping centers. They're off in, you know, angular centers. They're just not very good site selection. Try to balance opportunity of your occupancy cost with traffic opportunity. It's not always necessary to be right next to the big guy. The big guy can stay there all day long, right? But the little guy, you're going to run out of money sooner or later. So when you pick your location, make sure it's a location that provides you some sustainability based on variable sales fluctuations, because that's what happens. Occupancy too high, you can't give up the labor because you got to have labor to drive sales. So the one number, again, and I keep saying this, it's the occupancy cost is the one that'll put you out of business or prevent you or make you broke. Because again, that liability from your lease is probably the largest liability you're going to have as a small business owner. And that doesn't go away because you've got a personal guarantee on that. The landlord's going to make you sign a personal guarantee. So think about that component and what your exit strategy would be in the event that you need to get out.
That is just gold right there. Yeah, and as you say that, it reminds me of what we ran into, which was so our first location. We had an incredible location. It was in a brand new shopping center that just became the buzz, and there were big names in there. There was a Taco Bell, there was a Dunkin' Donuts. It was in California, so Habit Burger, which was popular. There was a Supercuts, Jersey Mike's, like all the big names, right? And then we bought a resale location and it was 300 square foot bigger. So it was 1,400 square foot. Didn't need to be. Our first store was just shy of 1,200 square foot. So we're paying on an extra 200, 300 square foot that we don't need. And, in Class A retail, that gets expensive. That adds up, especially, what in a concept that's maybe only a $600,000 AUV or so, right? And then in Florida, they tax commercial leases. So there's a 7% tax on the rent. So then not only are you paying more for the extra square footage, but now you're paying more. And so what happened was that location, like we always struggled with profitability there because of that occupancy cost. And the location was in a transient area where there was a high traffic count, but people didn't really stop in that area. It was just kind of that local community. So to try to grab the traffic and get them to stop to come to that shopping center as they're passing by was difficult. So yeah, interesting, huh?
Yeah, and the other thing, there's a lot of things about location that are subtle. And I always remembered when I was looking for sites, I built about 8 Taco Bell stores that were offsets for other stores. I built a couple of new ones. And I remember how I approach building stores. Now, an offset to an existing store is a lot different than a new
What do you
a
mean by
new store.
offset?
But so let's say that it's an older store, you bought it from Taco Bell, and it has a short-term franchise agreement because of the age of the store, of the asset, and therefore they want you to offset it with a brand new asset in the relative same trade area. So let's say you have a store in a shopping center that's 15 years old, and Walmart was the primary daily needs driver, and Walmart moved over here. So so your daily traffic counts and your sales are impacted by that. You would want to close that store at the end or before the end of the franchise if there was an opportunity to develop over by the new Walmart, which would give you another 20 years of revenue. Does that make sense?
Yep, makes a lot of sense.
So older stores that are kind of phasing out short-term agreements, the trade area is still viable, but that property, that building does not meet brand standards, and so it has to be upgraded. So you can scrape and build right from the ground up on the same site, or you can pick a different location if the trade area has shifted.
Hey, I hope you're enjoying the podcast episode so far. One of the most consistent things that we hear from people that reach out to us is that buying a franchise feels really confusing. There's so many options out there. It's a scary decision. They don't know how to vet or do the due diligence or really narrow down on the right franchise for them, and then they really feel alone in the process. You might be the only one in your family who's ever pursued buying a franchise or being an entrepreneur, or maybe you've tried to start a side hustle before, or other businesses like me. Like before franchising, I was not able to crack the code on entrepreneurship. I'd like to invite you to reach out and work with us. We've helped many clients buy franchises, get them profitable, or by resale businesses that are thriving, talking about highly profitable resales, great value. It's allowed many of our clients to actually quit their job right away and replace their income immediately. So if you want to work with me and my team on finding or buying a franchise, doing due diligence, vetting it, or resale, then go ahead and go to tarzjohnson.com/consulting, and we're happy to see if we can help. All right, enjoy the rest of the episode. It's very interesting.
The other thing I wanted to bring up real quick is the other thing I see a lot is people who invest in these new franchises. They put all their money in building out the facility. And then when I meet them about a year and a half later and they're struggling, the first thing they say to me, I ask them, well, what kind of marketing budget do you have? They go, well, I don't have a marketing budget because I spend all my money building out the restaurant. Very, very common. So if you want to give a tip to your franchisees, is don't spend all your money building out your restaurant that no one's going to come to if you don't have any marketing.
That's a recipe for disaster.
So quite simply, I heard it last week. I had a great concept, put all of his money into equipment and the ambiance, and ran out of money for marketing. So he's sitting there with no
Man, that's
sales.
rough. What were the some, and I know you had, big name brand concepts, but what were some of your go-to marketing strategies as an operator?
Well, when I came out, I in 2000, I started using the internet. So I came up with a program for Taco Bell, and Taco Bell kind of embraced it. They kind of looked down on local guerrilla marketing, right? Because they're this big brand, they know everything. But I came up with a program called Customer Crunch. And this was like early 2000s. This was before the internet was really big. And remember those little key tags that they would give you like at Blockbuster, the frequent shopper key tags for the grocery store? Well, I had a little key tag made, and it was called Customer Crunch. And so to get the key tag, you would have to fill out a data card and get your email address. Now this is 2000, right? So I started doing that, and I started doing a birthday club. You sign up and you join our birthday club. We send you a free combo meal certificate for your birthday. So I started building up this database, and we had over 360,000 people in this database after about 10 years. And so we were internet marketing in the early 2000s to this customer crunch club. And what we would do is we'd send them out email blasts Thursday for the limited time special that would start on Monday. So they would be able to go in with a special coupon and try that product first, right, for their friends. And then we had the birthday club. So then we come up with another phase of it called the Student Crunch Program, which was another key card program that we gave to schools for their school program. The teachers could hand them out based on achievement awards, and it would give them a 99-cent taco or a 59-cent taco. I can't remember what the price was when they showed their Student Crunch key tag. So I'm a huge believer in guerrilla marketing, getting it out there and building the awareness of your restaurant within your community or your business. Doesn't matter. It can be a restaurant, it could be anything else within your business. And that drives your core customer base up. And those are the kind of things we did, loyalty programs. I remember I was on back then we were Tricon. It went from Yum Brands to Tricon. No, it went from PepsiCo to Tricon, then to Yum Brands. And I was on the Tricon internet team with the CMO of Taco Bell and the chief people officer for Jonathan Blum was his name at the time. He was chief people officer for Yum Brands or Tricon at that time. It's fun stuff. I mean, you can do all sorts of cool things, but the guerrilla marketing is really where you're going to make the difference. Because in marketing, my philosophy is you play to win the tie, right? Everybody's going to be on TV. Everybody's going to be on billboards. How do you get to the person who doesn't do that? It's with kindness, reaching out and establishing your foothold in the community with other businesses.
Man, yeah, and I feel like it's what a way to get ahead because most businesses are just not going to do that. They're not going to invest the time and the energy. What are your thoughts on mailers? Did you guys do a lot of that stuff? And was that something that you had control over, or was that like if they were done, it was done at the corporate franchisor level and they kind of handled everything?
Well, Taco Bell never did any mailers. Now, for my local store program, I only mailed out the birthday cards. Now, KFC is a whole different animal. They're kind of caught up in that couponing game like Pizza Hut, right? I mean, when Pizza Hut started the coupon, I can't remember who started couponing, but the pizza industry just couponed themselves into a permanent discount, right? I mean, because who orders pizza over the phone and goes, "What's the deal?" Why don't? Yeah, I mean, what's the deal? You got two larges, whatever. So KFC was huge print drop, and the print drops were coordinated by your advertising agency. All the creative came out of corporate. You could pick your creative and whatever coupons you wanted based on your distribution area, and that was the only time I used paper. It was effective for KFC, um, but not any other concepts, I don't think. Print media, I think, is dead now. I really do. Unless it's a handwritten note.
Yeah, people tend
Now,
to open
when you
those.
talk about, yes, when you talk about guerrilla marketing and trying to establish relationships with other people, a personal handwritten note is probably the best way to get their attention because no one does it anymore.
Mm. Yeah, it's interesting. So you own a business brokerage franchise. So every day you're working with people that are selling their business as well as business buyers. What do you think about? Have you heard this whole movement on boring businesses? There's this whole movement around buying boring businesses and buy a business with no money down. What's your thoughts on this whole movement that's happening online?
Good question. I think there's some opportunities for buying businesses with no money down. I think they're kind of far and few between just because, and they're, unless you have the expertise in that area, how are you going to do better than the guy that started the business? I mean, there's a lot to scaling. I mean, you can talk about scaling business, but in order to scale, you have to understand the business model. What a lot of buyers don't understand is that if that gentleman or woman, whoever, that business owner has been operating that business for 15 years, now they may not be the best operator. They may not be the best businessman, but what they do have is knowledge of the business, how the actual tactics of the business work. That cannot be replaced. So I caution people getting into a business venture with no money down just because it's no money down. I mean, if you're assuming liabilities, if you're assuming a lease, again, we get back to lease liability, you know. Hey, I got businesses right now that guys would give you their business if you took over their lease. I've got probably two or three of them. I'd make one call and the guy would say, "Yes, come, I'll give you the keys, take over the lease."
Yeah, yeah, especially with that.
So be careful. Yeah, and these guys, I mean, they're selling a system, right? Just because the system worked for them doesn't mean it's going to work for you because you have to find the right opportunity to get that system. And again, if you're doing your due diligence, why try to save something that's already failing when you can create something that is going to be more relevant, possibly more sustainable? Now, the other side to that is legacy businesses. And this is a program that I'd love to talk to you about in more detail because it's an idea that I've had that I think is a wonderful idea. And basically, it kind of seams up a couple of needs for both our society as well as are people as assets. You have all of these legacy businesses out there doing, especially in the trades. Like, for example, guys that rebuild gear sets for transmissions, guys that do all the heavy welding. People come around from all over the city just because this guy's the welder, dude. He can weld anything. Well, what? These guys are all aging out. I've met with them. You know what the first thing they say to me is? No one wants to do this job. This when I die, this thing's going away. No one's going to do this. There's only two people in town that know how to do that. Well, my idea is why let these go, right? The guy that's rebuilding this transmission gear, there's probably 5 million cars in the city of St. Louis that have transmissions. Where are they going to get their transmissions fixed after this guy goes away? But they have to buy a new one? Well, there's an opportunity, right? So I've come up with this idea called a legacy business transformation or transition program. I haven't nailed the name down, but quite simply, the idea is why not find young, talented tradesmen that have the entrepreneurial spirit, but maybe not all the business acumen and maybe not the money, and pair them with guys like this, the welder guy, the guy that's doing the gears, and form a partnership where they train them and they take over their business. And maybe there's some seller financing involved, kind of as a mentorship, but there's got to be young kids that want to do dirty jobs, right? Dirty jobs. That's where the money is today. No one wants to do the dirty jobs. So if we can find young entrepreneurs that have trade skills, that would be willing to be matched with a legacy owner in a business that, is needed, but there's not a lot of growth in it and not a lot of interest yet. We can incorporate this dirty jobs legacy transformation and get these guys replaced with young entrepreneurs that see the huge opportunity. Think about it. On the business side, the upside is if you're producing a product that has very low supply, your price opportunity is huge. You talk about building margins, right? I mean, if you're the only one or two only guys in town making the widget, I think you're making the price too. Talk about sustainability and relative profit growth, huge potential. Why is it only one guy? Why not 10 guys? Why not become the gear guy for the whole region, the whole state? Starts with just one legacy transformation that could recreate and re-energize businesses that have seemed to disappear because of whatever, not rational reasons, but for societal reasons or business competitive reasons.
Yeah, and it's interesting, and that's it. I feel like it's part of the shift that's now occurring of, the really the mom and pops are starting to become fewer and fewer, and the chains, whether corporate or franchise, are becoming more and more because of this lack of transition, really. And it's tough because I do feel like that, like, to what you're saying, there is a sweet spot where there are folks out there who do want to work hard. It's just, I feel like as a society, everyone wants the shiny object, the get rich quick thing. So, they want to buy into this dream of, okay, well, let me buy this business and then hire someone to operate it for me. And, that's where I think that, if I had to choose between a traditional business resale or a franchise resale, I think in most cases I'm going to choose the franchise resale because at least I know the franchisor is going to train me. At least I know I can call my neighboring franchisees when I'm stuck and I don't know what the hell I'm doing and get some advice. And I think that can become the tough part, right? Of someone buying a traditional business where now they're going, like you said, the owner has started that business from scratch, operated it for 20 years. They can operate the business in their sleep. Someone else buys it, yeah, the profitability's through the roof, but once you put someone in there that doesn't know the business, doesn't have the experience, like, all of a sudden that business, that legacy doesn't like doesn't carry on, right? And so it's, how do you recruit those people and find those people that do want to be operators? And to your point, I think that's a huge gap in the marketplace, is for those people, for those young kids out there that are like, you know what? I'm willing to put in the work. I'd like to be the operator. I'm not looking for a quick fix. I'm not trying to be semi absentee in something. I want to work my ass off and make a lot of money for myself. And then you can start to build a system and kind of train people underneath you, but you got to learn it yourself first.
Well, and the thing about learning it is that you learn so much outside of the intended learn scope, right? You're learning how to run a restaurant, but then you're learning about how to deal with people, how to deal with vendors, how to solve problems. It's all of the ancillary things that you learn along the way. How to negotiate a lease, how to deal with vendors, how to deal with, upset customers, how to deal with people that are trying to sell you things all the time. How to stay focused primarily every day on the core accountabilities of what you got to do. If it's running a restaurant, it's food and labor. Every day, it's food and labor, food and labor, food and labor, right? Um, Other businesses, your focus is different, but you know, don't be afraid of making mistakes. Just don't make them again if they cost you big money. You know, I always like, my opinion is never take advice from somebody who hasn't lost money, because they truly don't have the passion of learning. Because there's nothing that's going to drive you to learn more than a loss, whether it's financially, personally, or whatever. You God makes us trip so we get better. And don't be afraid of tripping, right? So, other than that, I mean, again, the marketing piece is critical. Save your money. Make sure you got enough budgeted for marketing so you can get started off the right way. And that's what franchisees do, franchisors, right? They give you that $5,000 per store, or whatever the allocation is, so you can do some advertising, maybe have a live remote, or whatever works in your market trade area.
Yeah. Now, you have an interesting vantage point because you're working with sellers and you're working with buyers, right? And so you're working with those people that are able to sell their business for a great price. And then the folks that they're maybe dealing with a little bit of a pipe dream of like what they're actually what the market will pay might be only 30, 40, 50% of what they want to sell for. What's the big difference between the businesses that can sell for 4 or 5, 6x valuable multiple of profits versus a business that really isn't going to get much for it? And how can someone set themselves up? Because I think when people are buying the business, whether a franchise or starting the business, they're really not thinking with the end in mind in most cases. And okay, one day I'm going to sell this, even if one day is 5, 10, 15 years. So how can someone think about that from before they buy or before they start the business?
Okay. The main primary driver of Main Street businesses from a valuation standpoint is a multiple of what we call sellers' discretionary earnings. That is your net income of the business, add back interest, depreciation, as well as non business related expenses. That's what we call an adjusted cash flow. We multiply it by the industry multiplier or the market multiplier to get your value. So, that being said, cash flow is king. So, if I was to give any recommendations, the primary drivers are cash flow, positive cash flow, history of positive cash flow, and the appearance of sustainability of cash flow. That's what a banker is going to want to see, right? Does the business model, has it proven that it can generate cash? Has it proven that it can generate cash into the future? So, as far as valuation goes, focus on cash flow. Everything that drives a dollar to the bottom line is critical. That's why occupancy cost is very critical because it's fixed, it doesn't change. You can improve your labor, you can improve your food costs through operational efforts. You can't improve the fixed costs. So, that would be the most relevant thing that I would focus on if I'm a business owner is continually focus on cash flow improvement, margin opportunities.
And Peter, what from, in representing sellers and helping people sell their business, what are you seeing as the businesses or industries from the get-go that offer the best cash flow opportunities?
Well, obviously, it's really hard to answer that. Because again, it depends on the business model. Business models that throw off a lot of cash are typically in the technology sector. Now, I don't deal with a lot of technology. I have a couple of clients that I'm working with on technology platforms. Um, but as far as margins go, they're pretty much across the board, um, pretty much the same. I say based on industry. It's just a hard question to ask because again, there's too many variables involved in it. What's the market opportunity for sales? A lot of things. Let me back into it by saying this. Most people, when they buy a business, fail to do the throughput assessment. What I mean by that is if a restaurant is easy to quantify this way. If you have 35 seats, and let's say you have a drive-through, or you don't have a drive-through, how many transactions physically at 100% capacity can you produce? Is the revenue of that? That is your ultimate pie in the sky, right? You scale it down from there based on transactions and check average. And that way you see, can you produce this much revenue out of this facility given 100% of everything being right? What's the maximum profit? If that number doesn't meet your investment goals, don't buy it. The other thing is when you're looking at your investment of any business, what most buyers in the marketplace are looking for is a 20% return on investment and 5 years or less return on capital investment. Those are the two barriers that most buyers, if the opportunity doesn't meet those two, then it's usually not a good buying scenario. Because if you don't have those two numbers, you have a big issue with the financing of the business. You can put any sales price you want on it, but unless it can get purchased and financed, it's not a realistic sales price. So we really work with our clients a lot, and it's a tricky model. It's a tricky thing to do because different banks have different valuation methods and how they apply their debt service coverage ratio interpretations. So we try to work with our sellers to manage the sales price and the finance capability of the acquisition to balance out with what their expected capital um, proceeds at point of sale are. So we try to balance all three of those things. And that's why I think we're probably a little more effective than most, is because it's about managing the seller's expectations of what their proceeds are going to be. I mean, there's no use, you know, telling people pie in the sky. Um, Now, I will tell you that we have a service at Sunbelt that is franchise resale service. So if you have, and we have agreements with most of the big franchise companies. So if there's anybody out there that has a franchise that wants to resell, they can reach out to us and we can help them. I've sold all different types of franchises, obviously. Some of the Main Street ones I've done recently, a UPS store, um, 1-800 Radiator, um, Papa Murphy's. Those are some of the franchises I've done um, lately. But I've worked on others. I also done another um, smaller, some smaller franchise stuff. Um, but I see a lot of these franchise guys in year 2 and year 3 really struggling, and it's because they don't do their due diligence up front and really make sure that that profitability out of that one unit matches your investment goals. You know, balance that with the opportunity cost of what you're doing now, um, and what the return is there. Owning a business should not be a sexy thing. It should be done because somebody's interested in you know providing a service and getting paid for it. You know, maybe legacy, family, you know, pass throughs, whatever.
Well said. Yeah, I love that, and we'll make sure to drop the links for anyone that may be in the market for selling their business, and want to have a conversation with Peter. We'll close after this, but it's interesting because you mentioned about one of the things that you guys do well is setting the expectations for the seller, and a lot of the times when I see something really overpriced or the seller with unrealistic expectations, it's often a seller who's trying to sell their business on their own, right? And there's no intermediary there to talk logic and facts with them and actual numbers and valuation and how they're just like, well, I want to make this because this is how much money I've got into it, and in order to get my money back, I want to sell it for X number of price, and it's it's just not necessarily what someone will be willing to pay. Or, as you mentioned, you can't get a loan on it because the numbers don't make sense. The bank's not going to underwrite it, even with SBA. And so you'd have to find a cash buyer. And, so yeah, I think that's really interesting. Hey, before we go, thank you so much for listening to this episode. Please subscribe here on YouTube if you haven't already. And the biggest thank you that you could ever give me is to share this episode with someone who you think will benefit. That means that we can share this message with more people and hopefully positively inspire them like we have you. So thank you. And until next time, go build your empire.